It started with turbulence, not from the sky, but from within the cabin. Sergeant Maya Thompson had boarded Flight 728 from Dallas to Washington, D.C. in full uniform, her camouflage blending in with nothing but her own quiet resolve. She was returning home on emergency leave after news that her mother had suffered a stroke. She hadn't slept in 36 hours, having come straight from an overnight field exercise. Her boots were still caked in red Georgia dirt, her eyes heavy with worry, but her back was straight, her presence disciplined. The airline had bumped her to an earlier flight due to the urgency of her leave, and as she entered the plane, she nodded politely at the flight crew. What she didn't expect after years of serving her country was to be treated like an intruder by someone paid to ensure her safety. The flight attendant, a woman in her mid-40s with a prim smile and narrowed eyes, eyed Maya with a mixture of suspicion and disdain. The moment Maya reached her assigned seat, a middle seat near the rear of the aircraft, the woman approached with a voice like steel and vinegar. "Excuse me," she said curtly, "you can't store your bag there. That overhead is for our priority passengers." Maya blinked. "This is my assigned seat." You thought wrong," the woman snapped, reaching up and yanking Maya's duffel from the compartment with such force it nearly struck the passenger beside her. The bag thudded onto the aisle floor. "You people always think, the rules don't apply to you," gasps erupted from nearby rows. "You people?" someone whispered. Maya's lips parted in stunned silence. She bent down to pick up her bag, struggling to remain composed. She wasn't in combat, but her heart raced like she was under fire. "Ma'am," she said calmly, "I serve in the United States Army. I'm on emergency leave." "My mother, she's in the hospital." The flight attendant rolled her eyes and stepped closer, invading Maya's space. "You military types think that uniform gives you special privileges. This isn't a charity flight." That was when it happened, the shove. It wasn't hard enough to knock Maya over, but it was hard enough to make her stagger back, to make everyone around her freeze. Time seemed to slow. For a moment, Maya's training urged her to let it slide, to pick up her bag and sit down to avoid conflict. But something deep in her spine stiffened, not just for herself, but for every woman in uniform, every black service member who had ever been disrespected, underestimated, or erased. With a trembling hand, Maya took out her phone. She dialed one number. The call connected immediately. "Major Collins," she said, her voice low but firm. "I need to report a situation on Flight 728 American Eagle. I've just been physically confronted by a flight attendant while in uniform. I have multiple witnesses!" There was silence on the line for a second, and then the Major's voice turned sharp. "Stay on the line. Do not deplane. We're handling this." 30 seconds later, the aircraft door, which had been moments from closing, was reopened. A voice came over the intercom. "All passengers, please remain seated. We're experiencing a delay due to a security incident." The murmurs started immediately. The flight attendant's face went pale. A gate agent stepped in, followed by 2 TSA officers. Maya remained silent as they walked down the aisle and asked her to point out the individual involved. She did, quietly, clearly. The flight attendant's voice cracked as she began to protest. "She's lying. She's making it all up. I barely touched her." But passengers in rows 22 to 28 began speaking up, their voices rising like a wave, recounting what they saw, what they heard. She said, "You people." She yanked the bag out on purpose. She shoved her. The words hit like gavel strikes, justice in real time. The captain himself walked down the aisle, approaching Maya with measured dignity. "Sergeant Thompson, I apologize for what you've experienced. I want to assure you this is not how we treat our service members. We're removing the flight attendant from this aircraft, and the airline will be conducting a full investigation." There was an audible sigh of relief in the cabin. The offending woman was led away, still sputtering, her voice drowned out by the hum of phones recording the aftermath. And then something unexpected happened. As Maya sat back down, still shaken, the passengers around her began to applaud, not out of spectacle, but solidarity. The woman next to her offered a gentle smile and a tissue. "Thank you for your service," she said softly. A man across the aisle added, "And for your courage today." The plane sat on the tarmac for another hour while a replacement crew member was found, but no one complained. Everyone seemed united in an unspoken understanding. They had witnessed something bigger than a delay. Maya sat with her hands folded over her lap, staring out the window, tears threatening to spill. Not from fear or pain, but from the sheer emotional weight of being seen, being heard, being believed. In a world where women like her often had to carry their burdens alone, today strangers had risen to walk beside her. When the plane finally lifted into the sky, Maya closed her eyes, whispering a silent prayer for her mother, whatever she found. Waiting at the end of this flight, she knew she would face it with dignity. And thanks to one call, a community of witnesses, and a single moment of truth, she would never again question whether her voice mattered. The story spread in days. Passengers' videos went viral. News outlets picked up the footage. The airline issued a public apology, suspending the flight attendant pending investigation. Veterans groups rallied behind Maya. Messages poured in from all over the country. "You stood up for all of us. You reminded us that silence helps the oppressor. You are a hero, and not just in uniform but in spirit." Weeks later, Maya visited her mother in the hospital. She held her hand, gently brushing a lock of silver hair from her forehead. "I made it, Mama," she whispered, "and I didn't stay silent." Her mother, eyes fluttering open with effort, gave the faintest of smiles. It was all Maya needed. Not every battle is fought with bullets. Some are fought in aisles, in uniforms, with cameras rolling and hearts trembling. But every battle for dignity, when fought with truth, bravery, and integrity, becomes a story that inspires others to rise, to speak, to push back against the unjust weight of silence. And for every soldier who has ever walked unnoticed among us, may Maya's story be a reminder. The world is watching, and change is only one voice away. As the days turned into weeks, Maya's story continued to ripple far beyond the airport gates or even the airline's statement. It found its way into living rooms, classrooms, and boardrooms across the country. The footage captured by a young law student seated 3 rows behind Maya, who would later say, "I was raised by a black veteran, I knew I had to record it," was aired on every major network. Commentators weighed in, not just on the shocking behavior of the flight attendant, but on the broader issue of how black women, especially those in uniform, are routinely disrespected and dehumanized, even while serving their country. Maya, overwhelmed by the sudden media attention, initially avoided interviews. She hadn't stood up to be famous, she stood up because it was right. But eventually, when the veteran community and several advocacy organizations reached out asking her to speak, she agreed, not for herself, but for those who couldn't. She appeared on morning shows in her dress blues, composed and unshaken. "It wasn't just about me," she said. "It was about a culture that allows disrespect to go unchecked. I wasn't going to be silent and complicit." At one particularly emotional town hall in Atlanta, Maya shared the full story. How she had buried 2 fellow soldiers just months before, how she had held herself together for her platoon, how being strong had become her default, even when she was breaking inside. "That flight wasn't the hardest thing I've faced," she told the room of mostly young servicewomen. "But it was the first time in a long time I felt like I wasn't standing alone." A young Air Force cadet stood up, tears streaking her cheeks. "I've been told to smile more, be less aggressive, and stay in my lane more. Times than I can count," she said. "You gave me the strength to say, enough." And then the entire room stood clapping. The applause went on for minutes. Back in Washington, the Pentagon issued a statement acknowledging Maya's ordeal and reaffirming the military's commitment to protecting service members, not just abroad, but at home. Her commanding officer, who had once scolded Maya for being too outspoken during training, called her personally. "I was wrong," he said simply, "and I'm proud of you." More than 150,000 people signed a petition demanding better protections for service members traveling commercially, especially those in uniform. Airlines were forced to reevaluate their crew training. American Eagle, under increasing scrutiny, initiated mandatory bias and conduct training across all departments and invited Maya to participate in a panel to help reshape their internal policies. She declined the offer to serve on the committee, not out of bitterness, but because she believed the work shouldn't fall on the shoulders of the harmed to fix the system that harmed them. "You don't get a pat on the back for cleaning up a mess you created," she said in a powerful blog post that was shared over 1 million times. And while the airline tried to rebrand and apologize, the flight attendant at the center of the story gave an interview of her own, claiming the situation had been blown out of proportion. But the public wasn't buying it. The video, the testimonies, and Maya's calm, measured words painted a picture too stark to ignore. For Maya, healing didn't come easily. Her mother recovered slowly, and they spent long nights watching the news coverage together in silence. Sometimes Maya cried. Sometimes she just stared at the screen in disbelief. One night, her mother took her hand and said, "You didn't just come home for me. God put you on that plane for something bigger." It was then that Maya began to think of her story not just as a moment, but as a movement. She partnered with a nonprofit that advocated for women of color in the armed forces, helping them launch a mentorship program for junior enlisted members. She used her sudden visibility to bring attention to other stories, ones that didn't go viral, ones that ended in discharge, silence, or worse. In one viral speech at a Women in Defense event, she said, "Every salute we give should be returned with respect. The flag on my shoulder doesn't erase the color of my skin or the shape of my body. I serve, but I am not invisible. I fight, but I deserve peace." The room erupted. Eventually, Maya's story was adapted into a short documentary, which was nominated for several awards. She watched the premiere from her living room with her mother beside her, both of them holding hands as the opening scene played, the quiet image of a woman in uniform stepping onto a plane, unaware of what was about to unfold. That film became required viewing in several flight training programs across the country. It was also shown at several military academies as an example of moral courage. The phrase, "You don't get a pat on the back for cleaning up a mess you created," became something of a rallying cry. Young women began using it in their posts in classrooms, in military blogs. It became shorthand for accountability. Maya didn't want credit. She wanted change, and slowly, change was happening. Maya never flew again in uniform unless absolutely required. But when she did, strangers recognized her. Not from the news, but from the feeling she inspired. On one flight, an elderly white man in first class stood and offered her his seat without saying a word. She declined gently, but thanked him. He simply nodded and said, "You deserve better than a middle seat." Years later, Maya was promoted to staff sergeant, and then eventually to first sergeant. She took command of a new unit, one filled with young, diverse faces looking to her for strength. On her first day, she told them, "Out there, not everyone will see your worth, but in here, we build each other up, we fight for each other, and we don't let disrespect slide." The room echoed with a silent oath, and in the quiet of her own life, Maya returned to writing. Her memoir, One Call Away, became a bestseller, detailing not just that day on the plane, but the many moments before and after that shaped her path. From growing up in a single-parent household in Baton Rouge, to surviving boot camp, to finding her voice in unexpected places. At book signings, people would cry as they met her, not because of the flight incident, but because of the way she carried herself in its aftermath. With dignity, with purpose, with fire. Her story, born from one ugly moment, became a beacon for countless others. Because in the heart of turbulence, when the world pressed her down, Maya Thompson stood up, and in doing so, she lifted all of us with her. Moral of the story. True courage isn't just shown on battlefields, it's shown when we stand up against injustice, even in the most ordinary places. Respect must never be conditional, and silence in the face of discrimination is complicity. When one voice speaks truth with strength and dignity, it can awaken hundreds more. And sometimes, the most powerful act of service is not following orders, but defending your own worth and the dignity of others.